you go.
For the record, my lecture was delayed by a game of Hangman.
I'll make sure that gets posted online.
All right, so raise of hands. How many people know anything about food debate or food security? All right, we got a couple people in the room. Anything? Do you know what food is?
I'm not sure. It depends on the day.
So food security is a pretty big issue, and I made the mistake of never really researching it when I was competing, and I should have, because right before the Arab Spring was going on, like a few months before, the politics and the economics of the situation were trending towards a revolution of some kind. However, the food security situation there was a significant factor for why the Tunisia uprising sparked all these other uprisings across the Middle East. So food security really matters, especially when you're thinking about arguing about the start of revolutions or the start of asymmetrical warfare, any kind of big, unpredictable impact scenario, which is fun because they're usually high probability. So we're going to just talk about this domestically with the United States, internationally, which is going to be exercise in sadness, and also talk a little bit about the critical debate. So, are you going to go? Okay, domestic issues. So right now there's a whole bunch of ongoing policy disputes in both the federal and state governments. Like, for example, the food stamp program was just severed from the crop insurance program, which was a big deal. It was one of the main ways that Democrats were able to make sure that food stamps always got funding at the federal level. In addition to that, crop insurance has a huge effect on the market. It does a couple things like maintaining the a low level of supply in the market, enabling a high return for farmers and more likely corporations than individual family farmers on their production, meaning that these parts of the market remain somewhat stable. Secondarily, water rights in the western states especially is a big deal. Let's see if we got the, yeah. This is a map of all the water sustainability index, and you can see in the Southwest, the South and Central states, here in the Mississippi and down here in Florida, that there are a lot of areas that by 2050 are going to have some really big problems with maintaining their water supplies. With California, for instance, because I'm Californian, Southern California has basically no water supply that can maintain its population growth. At this time, they are relying very, very heavily here on Northern California with the Sierras and all the ice caps and lovely stuff up there that gets pumped down to Southern California. However, those ice caps are starting to deplete in part because of global warming, also because there have been a series of droughts throughout the last 5 years or so. And this trend is going on throughout the entire United States right now. The water table is being overused, especially in the mountainous regions, to the point where states like Utah, in the next 10 years or so, it's likely that this entire state will go back to becoming a desert. It's a huge agricultural area for livestock feed, but if the water use trends go on as they are right now, there's not going to be enough water for even livestock feed. Go back here really quick. Also, there's a lot of debate going on between GMOs and organic foods. For example, California just passed a GMO labeling law. A lot of this is kind of just periphery rhetoric, but it does have an impact on what kind of laws we could see in the future. What's up?
So when you were talking about water trends, what do you mean? Like, are we just watering your grass too much?
I mean,
Shower on too much?
that's part of it, and water conservation certainly, like watering your lawn, watering your trees, using less water to just clean yourself. That all goes into water conservation. But the big draw for water conservation, or from the water supply right now, is for agricultural purposes. So specifically trying to run agriculture in the usually very, very dry areas that don't have nearly enough water to support a huge agricultural industry in those areas. Okay. Trade. Okay, so in the United States, there's a few regions that are very, very important to food production. Florida and California and Illinois being of the three biggest ones. In fact, I think I have, yes. This graphic shows where all of the biggest producers are and where all that food usually goes. This is all internal domestic. We have a lot of imported food as well. But as you can see, Illinois, Louisiana, California, Iowa, Texas, those are the big five producers of food in the states. And all of those areas are going through severe water supply threats right now. So there is a propensity for all of the other populations that they support, like all these little strings going everywhere, that there's going to be a food crisis in the next few years because there is this water crisis in these local areas. So this kind of demonstrates how there are a few critical pillars that can be threatened if they aren't supported correctly. Yeah?
Will this be in like the Dropbox?
I'm going to put this on the Dropbox if I can. I think I can export all of this. Here's the next part. Food deserts are also a huge problem as far as food security goes. Now, most of this map covers like rural areas, but what you don't see, because it's such a blown up view, is that a lot of small urban centers, like most of Los Angeles, you see a little bit of green around it. In the very high density urban areas or suburban areas like East Los Angeles, there is a big problem with food deserts in those areas. And this prevents people from having relatively easy access to nutritious food. So typically in these food deserts, and in the way they categorize this, it means that you A, don't have a car, and B, don't have public transportation going to a major supermarket, and C, you don't have access to a supermarket within a 1 mile radius of your residence. So what this means is that people are defaulting to low quality foods that hurts nutrition, and it is, I mean, y'all have been making the arguments that it hurts like cognitive function and all that other jazz. So this is another big issue with feeding our population to a more humanitarian degree. Going back here for a second. Artificial pricing and the economy of scale are a big problem with making sure that our entire population both has a cheap source of food and an adequate supply of food. Artificial pricing, like with the farming insurance plans, that increases the price, but it also lowers the overall supply, meaning that whatever the supply is going towards, which is split up significantly in corn especially, to go into other non-food purposes, that is not available to the everyday person. Secondarily, the economy of scale problem makes the production of nutritious food very difficult. For example, in California, sorry, just going to keep on using California, we produce 50% of avocados eaten in the United States. And we actually eat most of that too. The rest of our avocados come from Mexico and other Latin American states, which, fun fact, there's this thing called blood avocados where where some of the drug cartels down in Latin America, they have significant control over these avocado farms, meaning that this is all very, very linked to a system of violence. And this happens whenever we are importing food from abroad, and often here at home too. There's a bunch of this that goes on in Florida and to Louisiana as well. Also, why are there so dang many corn products? Well, partially because we have this farm insurance program. It has allowed the ongoing scientific study of how to use these, how to use corn in more than just using them for food. Like just looking at all of this, you can get cellulose, sorbitol, formic acid. This stuff runs the gamut from the food production to industrial use to home cleaners. And it's really interesting how we've been able to diversify our use of one single staple. But that still takes away here from the availability of food to the everyday person. Yeah, we don't have time for ethanol. Everybody knows what goes on with ethanol. It's the same
question.
chain.
So, I don't know if this is a question or a comment, but I heard that one of the reasons why avocados is so important is because it's actually the only food that contains like all of the food groups. Like, it is a fat, it's a protein, it's everything. So that's why avocados are so like coveted and so expensive, because you can get everything you ever need from an avocado.
Exactly. And as a vegan, it's probably the biggest thing that it's the best thing I can ever eat.
Yeah.
And it supports, it's basically great for everybody that eats it, just adding it to their diet. So let's talk about the domestic BS that's going on. The biggest issue that needs to be
Politics.
yeah, the biggest concern right now is business interests in controlling the production of food. We're going to come back to this in a second. Just going to go to this graphic. Anybody seen this before? This shows how 10 companies, Kraft, Coca-Cola, PepsiCo, etc., they control basically all of the American brands and a lot of the foreign brands as well for food production. And this goes from junk food like Reese's and Jell-O to Tampax. And these companies form a kind of loose oligarchy where some of them will ally with each other for economic purposes every now and then. Sometimes they're fighting against each other, but they still maintain this huge control over the entire system, which, if you know anything about economics, having an oligarchy in charge, it raises the bar of entry to a very high degree, meaning that there is very little competition in the market overall.
It's not good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so environmentalists and their potential allies. Anybody know about the political activities of environmentalists these days? Nope. Okay. The Green Party is considered to be like the flagship organization for environmentalists in the United States. I kind of disagree, but it's little things. They run the gamut from like going to extreme eco and deep eco to just saying that we need to preserve our national parks and national forests. And the environmentalist wing is pretty divided in of itself. However, there are potential allies that they can work with as well. For example, I just read an article about how with sportsmen, hunters, all these people that you would think are like really super right-wing, because they care about the environment so much, or at least wanting to shoot the environment, that they would be a good ally in getting the policies passed that would protect the environment overall. On the other hand, we have the institutional conservatives and their idea of what we should be doing with food. Basically, they look at it as one of the biggest and easiest ways to make a profit. With the small state and city politicians and federal politicians as well, they all look at food companies as people that will give the biggest donations to their campaigns. So the food companies, I mean, even if you would in comparison to like the oil companies and the military-industrial complex and all that shit that we always make so much a big deal about, the food companies have a lot of influence as well. And this plays into a lot of problematic things, which we'll be talking about throughout. School foods is also an issue. School food and like public education food is considered to be fairly low quality, and there are some movements to make cheap and nutritious food available, but they're not getting too far right now. I had a list of relevant agencies and NGOs, but I lost it, so y'all can just look up some of those. That's just extra stuff. Also, there's a lot of anti-GMO rhetoric and politicking going on, and some decent research as well. I'm a little unsure about what I personally feel about GMOs, but I'm gonna show you two videos that'll demonstrate the two sides of the argument.
So which one does this one demonstrate first?
This one is the somewhat pro-GMO argument. And how can I get volume louder on this thing? Anybody know?
Volume on the
It should
wall.
be on that.
On where?
I don't know if this one.
It should be on the thing where you can control all the panels right in front of you, right?
You may need to exit out of the Pres A to increase the computer sound.
Okay. Yep, that was the problem.
Is how much objection? Que pensez-vous des plantes transgéniques? I'm amazed at how much objection genetically modified foods are receiving from the public. It smacks of the fear factor that exists at every new emergent science, where people don't fully understand it, they don't fully know or embrace its consequences, and so therefore reject it. What most people don't know, but they should, is that practically every food you buy in a store for consumption by humans is genetically modified food. There are no wild, seedless watermelons. There's no wild cows. There's no long stem roses growing in the wild, although we don't eat roses. You list all the fruit and all the vegetables and ask yourself, is there a wild counterpart to this? If there is, it's not as large, it's not as sweet, it's not as juicy, and it has way more seeds in it. We have systematically, genetically modified all the foods, the vegetables and animals that we have eaten ever since we cultivated them.
All right, so that's basically what his argument is. Does that make sense for the kind of pro-GMO side of the argument? Yeah, that's one potential argument you could make in in opposition to this next argument, which we're going to have to go to a webpage for.
People across the world have been marching against Monsanto, the world's leading producer of genetically modified foods. Protests against the GMO products are planned in over 50 countries. Let's take a look at why there's such an outrage. Studies suggest that GMO foods cause a whole range of illnesses that can take years to make themselves apparent. These include immune system diseases, allergies, and even childhood learning disorders. Moreover, toxins used to grow GMO crops have been found in the blood of pregnant women and their unborn babies, despite earlier claims that they are destroyed in the gut. Megan Lopez reports now from Washington.
And the rest is just seeing people shout about this. So, the entire issue about GMO food products is still up in the air. There's a lot of disagreement on the scientific consensus. For example, there's the common accusation that pro-GMO people are bought and paid for by food companies, whereas on the other hand, the anti-GMO people, their studies smack of the vaccine conspiracy. So there's pluses and minuses to both sides, and no side is necessarily right. Can I get this to, what the hell? Okay, moving on. We're running out of time, so just briefly over this. Michelle Obama's Let's Move program, that's something that's getting people involved. What's up?
Until 3:30.
Oh, 3:30? Okay, yeah. I mean, we're barely a third through, so. Michelle Obama's Let's Move program is getting some people involved on the school level. The Food Security Improvement Act of 2013 made some significant changes to SNAP, which is basically the food stamp program. So look that up, see how that affects things. Also, one of the more important food programs going on right now is WIC, the Supplemental Nutrition for Women, Infants, and Children program. This is basically the argument that you go for if you want to hit somebody in the emotions with your arguments. Saying that you're taking away food from pregnant women, infants, and children.
It's horrible.
Yeah. There's a few possible future actions, such as revising crop insurance, the socialization of food as a natural human right, urban agriculture development, aquaponics. Both of those two are basically just new technologies and applications of technology. Improving school foods, and some people have poised the idea of veganism as a possible solution for an overall improvement in societal health. The main problem that almost all of these future possibilities have to overcome is the economy of scale. If they can overcome that, and if you can make the argument that you overcome that, then these are viable actions for you to take as a plan.
There are several quotes from Leonardo da Vinci and Albert Einstein, like literally specifically saying that they believe that vegan lifestyle or pure vegetable eating rather than like the consumption of meat is probably the worst thing that humans can do to themselves, like mankind.
I mean, it's all debatable. Here's a video giving a brief example of, you know what, we don't have time for this. You can look at this later, but basically there's a few very, very interesting possible technologies that can help solve these issues of both the food deserts and the economies of scale, but that all takes some pretty heavy investments, needless to say. So when applying this information to debates, there's a few key issues you need to address. First, economy of scale. Second, food access, such as getting food assistance to the poor. Nutrition rights and impacts, which is more of a ethical debate than most of you are probably used to. Business impacts and political lashback. Political lashback and business impacts is probably going to be the main ground for the negative team if you ever adopt a food ath, or vice versa if you're ever on the neg. So keep these all in mind. Okay. Again, you can find this online later. We got to get moving. International issues, like I said, this is going to make you all really, really sad. Right now, there are dozens of food and water crises going on throughout the world. The United States really has it off easy right now. People are experiencing the basically semi-extinction narrative that I was laying out earlier. Some of the key crisis areas are Yemen, which has led to the continued fracture of the territory. It's not even a country anymore. Pakistan and India, they have a really bad history of warfare, but the two nations would not be at each other's throats still if it weren't for the fact that in the northwestern part of India and the northeastern part of Pakistan, a disputed territory, there is the main water resource for both countries. So they're constantly fighting over this.
You're talking about the Kashmir?
Yes. I keep on forgetting the name of it.
It's like cash and you.
It's like Kashmir, I think.
I know, but that's how I memorize it.
Also, China and Japan, they don't really face a water crisis as much as a food crisis because of their expanding populations. Japan especially, they are finding it very, very difficult to support their populations and maintain any kind of, or overcome any kind of economic disparity between classes. Japan, for example, I mean, they're basically building square mile buildings that hold over 100,000 people in them. They're small cities in of themselves, and the logistics to get food and agriculture to those locations is proving to be a monumental task that they are having a huge problem dealing with. South African states, they're having mostly a water availability crisis. And this plays into issues like societal health and hygiene, and also the overall viability of a industrialized state. Because if you can't generate enough food, you can't generate enough. If you can't generate enough food, you can't feed an industrialized state, basically. Also, in the Central African states, it's a similar issue, but one of economics, not of availability. There's actually a lot of water and arable land there. The problem is that because of ongoing conflicts throughout these regions and the, in some cases, high cost of even getting water, it's become an economic issue in many of these Middle African states. In Palestine, Israel, well, in Gaza, for example, there's basically no arable land, there's no water. I mean, I don't need to lay that out too much, I think y'all are familiar with it. And in the territories, in all the territories basically, there's a very limited supply of water. So when it gets down to it, most of that conflict is, yes, reactionary, but also it comes down to access to arable land, solid water supplies, and other issues. Or at least you can parse it down to that kind of issue. This has several impacts of scarcity. Like I mentioned before, water and food availability had a big impact, at least in my mind, on why why the Arab Spring started. And this leads to revolts and revolutions constantly, resulting in reactionary government crackdowns or even preventive government crackdowns, especially when it comes to water access in Yemen and South Africa, the nation of South Africa. This also causes rampant famine, economic deflation, and can lead to foreign intervention and dependency, meaning that basically the country becomes a mess and it's going to be very hard for them to recover from this period. Here's a map of, a very, very basic map, keep in mind, of some of the major trade routes for where food goes. The United States creates a bit of food, but we are consuming a whole lot of it as well. And a lot of the food from at least the Western Hemisphere is going back into the Eastern Hemisphere, back to China, back to Russia, back to the European Union, back to Egypt. All these places are dependent on these constant streams of food, which when you go to the international relations level makes it fairly unlikely that there's going to be a major outbreak of war again, like World War II. Oh, and here's another lovely little statistic. So this shows the world hunger relative to national food production. Basically, it's like how fast your population is growing and whether or not your food production can actually meet it. A lot of nations are struggling to meet this, and the reason why you're seeing like the United States and European Union not labeled is because they're industrialized, so they actually import the majority of their food, or they have no problem with producing enough for their own. Australia, for example, is one of those. And this gives you an idea of where the next potential conflict zones are going to be in the next couple decades.
So the more green they are,
The more green they are, the more green they are, the better they're able to meet the requirements of their population. As they get closer to red, it's more and more likely that
they're gonna fight over food.
yeah. Resource war, yay! This is water scarcity. So it affects a bunch of different areas in different ways. Like I said with Central Africa, the main issue here is economic accessibility to water, not so much the actual physical presence of water. And in some areas, so like South Africa, like Iran, like what was the former USSR, there are areas where they are approaching long-term, almost permanent droughts. Oh yeah, and you can see like basically in everywhere the Arab Spring was, there was a huge physical water scarcity. This leads to the intervention of other nations because we need to help out our neighbors, right? Well, that and use it as a carrot and stick policy. So there are several big national actors that are running aid missions. USAID, the United States Food Aid Program, and other things that they do, like using it as a caveat to get democratic reform in a country. That's one of the bigger ones. The EU and European Commonwealth, that's another. China actually came out as the third biggest. China came out as the third biggest food aid distributor, but that's mostly because they are keeping the people of North Korea alive, and they are sending some food aid to other countries in their sphere of influence. Sri Lanka, for example. Also, Turkey is acting as one of the major food aid distributors to nations facing conflict right now in the Middle East. Basically, they're keeping the Arab Spring alive at this point. As far as international aid missions go, we have the UN World Food Program, the WPF, which is a subsidiary. It is part of the UN. Then we have a couple other examples. CARE is a privatized, is not a private. It's a private non-governmental entity that engages in a whole lot of food aid. They make up for a fairly big majority of the food aid distributed privately. The Catholic Relief Services, they're not really all that big, but their presence, they're because they're so high on the list of donors, their presence demonstrates how the Catholic Church still is a significant influence on the world today. Also, Oxfam, they're kind of the private version of USAID, but they are constantly doing redevelopment they're constantly doing redevelopment of these countries as well. They're kind of a neoliberal organization in how they operate, in doing both food aid and helping countries rebuild. Now we get corporate interests again, and this is kind of becoming a recurring theme. So on the international stage, there are a couple main concerns for corporations. Seed control being probably the biggest one, because these are supposedly proprietary knowledge that they need to protect and need to maintain, otherwise they lose their economic edge on the world stage. Maintaining productivity as land started to dry up is also a big issue, and is leading to some of the, in some cases, development of deep water wells in water scarce areas. What's up?
I mean, when you mentioned seed control, it reminded me of the Russian Today video we saw as to why GMOs become controversial. And then I realized that there's a link between corporation interest in food security, which makes a lot of people angry. So it's not that we're people are anti-GMO, it's just that they're anti-corporations' influence and control over GMO.
Exactly. The main reason why people don't like GMOs like Monsanto is because they have really predatory business practices. Not so much that the GMO products themselves are usually inherently bad. Back to this. There's also a big focus on competition elimination and monopolization of the food industry itself. Going back to this graphic, this is just the United States. There are, I'd say, about 2 to 3 times as many of these mega corporations controlling in foreign countries that are controlling their respective branches of food and other product companies. However, these companies and these foreign companies, they're constantly in a struggle to get dominance on the world economic stage as far as who has more control over food. Yeah, they're becoming more and more powerful every day. Also, the shifting value of lands is a big issue, especially once we get to global warming. This is leading to farm relocation and the closing down of farms in several different countries and regions. For example, Russia went through a fairly big drought about 2 years ago, and that caused a huge flight of the food companies from Russia, favoring other countries like Southern Africa, causing them to go through a famine as well because they overproduced the land. Global warming, so much fun. So everybody knows there's going to be changing weather patterns, right? When global warming hits, it's already happening right now. This is going to relate to less. This is going to relate to less rainfall, or the change of where rainfall actually is away from agricultural zones. That results in the loss of arable land, as basically we have recreations of the Dust Bowl as in the 1920s all over again. Also, because of the rising tides, there's a significant chance that it would wipe out our infrastructure, our coastal infrastructure especially, within the next 10 to 20 years, depending on how fast the sea level rises. And because these infrastructure points are, well, go back to infrastructure a second. Anybody been to the Bay Area by San Francisco? Did you notice the huge cranes in Oakland where the cargo containers unload? They're like less than a foot off the water, the docks are. It doesn't take a whole lot of global warming for that entire area to be untenable for shipping, unless they turn the Golden Gate Bridge into a giant water dam. Which California's poor, it's probably not going to happen. Okay, refugee relocation. So when these floodwaters rise, it's going to make a lot of cities untenable, meaning that other people are going to have to move to other parts of their countries or even other countries in order to just survive. And that would put a strain on our food production, both because you lose a lot of agricultural workers and because you would have to completely reshape the agricultural, the food trade system to match these changing needs and capacities, which causes the relocating and developing of food-producing areas in different areas where historically you couldn't grow food. Canada, for example, is possibly going to be viable for arable land if global warming proceeds as predicted. The Extinction Debate, yay! So like I mentioned earlier, the intersection of economic forces in the SQUO makes World War III a smaller and smaller possibility until we get to the food crunch. I don't know if anybody was here for the lecture in here previously, but it was mentioned that nuclear weapons are unlikely to be used in a conflict unless it's to protect strategic resources, such as arable land. Meaning that when we get to a food crunch and when countries are starving, it is more and more likely that nuclear weapons or other strategic weapons will be deployed in order to in order to achieve battlefield dominance and to be able to take these arable lands, hopefully without polluting them with fallout. However, a state actor looking for conquest will be extremely unlikely to use their nuke and use a nuke in their campaign. Maintaining arable land will be the main goal, and with the shifting weather patterns of the global warming and the unpredictability of weather phenomena, it becomes less and less likely that the deployment of nuclear weapons is a good idea, especially if militaries are deployed in this arable land. This makes the non-state actors an even more dangerous threat on an existential and economic level because, for example, if the United States was reduced to only one state that could produce enough agriculture for the entire country, that would be the only target that a non-state actor with a nuke would need to target. They wouldn't even need to target near it. They would just need to target it from upwind. And the fallout would completely ruin the agricultural industry of the United States. Okay, sadness over. Let's talk about critiques. Everybody's been doing critique stuff all day, I assume. But when talking about food cases specifically, there's a few ways that you need to frame it in order for it to really work. These are a bunch of possible theories and possible impact areas that you can use to either criticize a case or come up with a critical alternative that would solve some problem within the food industry. For example, let's say you take the tribalism theory and pair it with nutrition rights. Tribalism basically reduces the political responsibility of an area down to very, very, very small, almost familial groups, meaning that hopefully people in the agricultural rich areas would have more access to better nutrition, and they could use that as a system of trade with other areas. And assuming that the tribalism theory is valid, I don't think so, but whatever, then that would solve the access to nutrition because you would have localized areas that are not looking for profit, they're just looking for survival and intercommunal support. So yeah, there's a bunch of different ways to frame around, especially when you get into critical intersections of food politics and critical theories. For example, how does the Hegelian dialectic play into food politics? Anybody got a clue?
What's the Hegelian dialectic?
It's the idea that it's the basis for Marxism, where the idea that two competing theories or societies or philosophies, they will clash, and where the thesis and the antithesis, they will clash, and through that clash they will create a new thesis so that is basically a permutation of one or all or both of the different theses before that clash. We don't have enough time. We'll go back to this brain exercise if we have time. Also, there are some very specific ways that you need to consider your engagement on the alternative when you're regarding food debates. For example, going to micropolitics, I think, is the easiest way to get access to a food alternative and food solvency, where micropol, our alternative is to go start a community garden. Do you want to come join us? Yes or no? Too bad. If you don't, anyway, the argument would stand that that example of micropolitics would set a trend going on to change the overall community of whatever location you're in to favor small community gardens. And that may be able to solve some part of your food harm scenario. How would rejection on the alt help solve food security? Think back to the domestic politics part of the lecture.
It's a rejection of what exactly?
Anything. Pick what to reject.
So like if people rejected to move agriculture, like wherever agriculture happens, if they reject to do that, and all these things are happening, like for example, the wind is moving in a different certain direction, or water is more available in a certain direction, they reject to move there.
I mean, it's not the material rejection so much as the philosophical rejection of an idea. Like, going back here, we could reject the intersection of capitalism and food politics, where our alternative is that this intersection is uniquely bad for humanity as a whole. We think capitalism is bad, but we're going to specify that to the rejection of capitalism and food politics is uniquely bad. So we need to reject the influence of capitalism within food politics. Make more sense?
It keeps people stuck, like unable to come up with different ideas or different.
I'm sorry?
I said I think I'm on the right track, but I could be wrong. It kind of keeps people stuck. It keeps them like limited in their thinking, so limited in the action.
By rejecting or?
Yes.
That's where the solvency story comes in. After the alternative, which we're going to get to that in just 1 second. Okay, last 2 slides. We'll have enough minute for more questions. Isolating solvency is really critical when you're doing a food critique of any kind. You need to identify how your alternative significantly changes the structure of food trade and or production. If you don't make that isolation, you're basically just trying to cross-apply different philosophical theories and to not making real-world application of the theory, which a lot of critique judges are going to absolutely hate. Also, you should try to leverage the perspective and mindset change that intuitively or not would come from the acceptance of the alternative. So, rejection of the capitalist intersection, rejection of the intersection of capitalism and food politics. That would, at least within the round, perhaps, if that was your argument, that would cause a shift in the mindset of the people in the room, and hopefully that would lead to real action outside of the room, meaning that you stop choosing your food products based on what's the cheapest price, what can I get the most of, do I have a bargain today on this thing? You choose what is best for your own nutrition. You still have to play into the capitalist system, however, you're not playing the game of capitalism where you go for the lowest price possible. That doesn't really help anyone on the micro or macro scale. Most of your solvency story will probably be articulation because unfortunately there's not all that much literature for changing to a new food production system. There's a bunch of big hyperboles about what could happen, but not like nothing that approaches the accepted level of specificity that most people are used to in critical debates. Finally, make sure that you go for cascading rhetoric impacts if you're using rhetoric as your framework. If you don't know what that means, don't worry. You can ask me after the lecture. I'll explain fully. I really like food cases, though, when responding to a critique, because they have a lot of inherent critical impacts that you can leverage in a really what's the word? Easy way. Because likely you're going to have impacts that can be extended to the critical level to weigh against the critique, such as we give people better nutrition. This means we are breaking down the system of poverty. Breaking down structures, breaking down cycles, all of this are code words for critical impacts. Comparing the educational value of the two positions, what does it mean what does a loss mean for your opposition? By that I mean, if you're going to do the food debate, likely you're going to be fairly deep on the warrants here, and I have a feeling that most people here are going to be more knowledgeable about the food politics issue than most other people in the community. So leveraging the educational value, meaning what you bring to the table and what your opponents learn, could be more important than the educational value of running the same critique over and over and over again. And that all comes down to about how education is prioritized within the round as a real-world impact. Also, locate the critical subtext of your case and present that as the perm. When dealing with another good team's alternative, such as, say the plan is we're going to increase aid, food aid to Egypt, they run a critique saying that we're engaging in securitization logic for one reason or another. You can answer that we can still reject securitization logic by recognizing the basic human rights and of access to nutrition as more important than security of the state or security of our international position. Also, always try and turn the onus of the K on the opposition. Not acting on plan violates a moral imperative found within the K's theory, such as trying to help as many people as possible. Trying to put a moral imperative in, or trying to bring out a moral imperative of the PMC is really helpful when answering a critique. So try and go for that whenever possible. But with food cases, it is probably one of the easier kind of topics to do it on. And that's about it.